Administration unveiling a tax plan today that slashes rates for the wealthiest Americans and for businesses, and as it turns out, both of those apply to him. When it comes to the fine points for the rest of us, a lot of questions still need to be answered.
The core principles of this we have agreement on, and we will work forward on the details.
You're going into very micro details on some of these. Very important. We agree.
Again, I think as we've said, we're working on lots of details.
It's going to mean a tax cut.
How much?
Going to mean a tax cut.
Again, those will be the details we will be working with Congress on.
Here to discuss now, Nicholas Kristof, a columnist for the New York Times. So you wrote about the taxes, but I want to ask you, because it's new, it's just in, about this presidential approval rating, the lowest since Eisenhower. How does that strike you if you look at the presidents we have up there on the screen?
Yeah, I mean, it's both remarkable how unpopular he is with the public as a whole, and the popularity he retains with his base.
Right.
And
with Republicans in general.
Yeah, and I mean, indeed, I think that partly reflects why he's engaging in this tax cut announcement, that if you're enormously unpopular, if you're worried about a Russia investigation, if you're accused of dishonesty, of not accomplishing anything in your first 100 days, then you may want to change the subject. You may want to try to show that you're doing something, and a tax cut may be the way to do that.
There are a number of other presidents that had lower approval ratings, but not in the first 100 days.
That's correct.
This is seen as the honeymoon period, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's down from here, typically, with the president.
It also shows to me, I think what's also important is that his handling of the job approval rating, of course, but his handling of immigration and also his handling of health care, it is not helping him. It did not help him among these in this poll.
I mean, I was reassured by the public reaction to his handling of immigration, because it seemed to me that was frankly, a demagogic move to target and scapegoat a particular group. Mm-hmm. And I was really glad that there seemed to be a backlash against it, presumably partly because it seemed to be handled very incompetently.
Immigration, it's only 41% approval, and then if you look at his handling of health care, it's only 36% approval, and so I think that probably really hurt him, and he didn't realize it was going to hurt him that much, but to propose something and then not get it done.
Yeah, I mean, as with a lot of things, I think the moment there are details, then there's resistance, and that's why we have a tax plan that is one page.
Yeah, and let's talk about that now. As we look at this, here's the one-page tax plan here, because you wrote a column today in the New York Times, and you said the president's tax plan is an irresponsible, shameless, budget-busting gift to zillionaires like himself, and that you see it as a betrayal of his voters. Explain that, Nicholas.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's intellectually dishonest, because President Trump and Republicans generally have been talking about the importance of debt and deficits. And here they come up with a plan that would completely blow up the deficit. I was doing some back-of-envelope calculations today. It looked as if over the next 15 or 20 years it would add $160,000 in federal debt per American household. It's like giving every American household an extra mortgage. What does that buy? Essentially, it's to provide payouts to very wealthy people in America today. We'd be borrowing from China to give large tax benefits to people like Trump. And this would be eliminating the estate tax, which affects only about 5,000 households a year right now, only the couples with more than $11 million in assets. It would be the alternative minimum tax, which affects the affluent, and indeed, in President Trump's 2005 tax return, it raised, otherwise he would have paid 4% in taxes. This way he paid 25%. And maybe most egregious of all is not just lowering the corporate tax rate, there's an argument for that, but allowing some business owners to pay at the corporate tax rate, not to pay at the 39% personal income tax rate, but instead to pay at this 15% tax rate. That is, I mean, what do you call that but a heist? Yeah. And that would apply to President Trump.
The average working man and woman who's sitting at home who voted for this president is saying, well, what gives here? What?
Yeah, I mean, it's camouflaged with some the standard deduction would be doubled, and that makes a lot of sense. They talk a good game about child care, tax benefits of some kind, but they don't explain it. And based on the child care tax benefits they outlined in the campaign, a low-income family would get an annual benefit of $10.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sure seems to me to be, borrowing from China to give a tax break to China in a way that betrays his base.
I want to play Secretary Mnuchin because this brings up if you're going to try to overhaul the tax code or at least give some tax cuts, his own taxes. And Steve Mnuchin talked about whether the president will release his tax returns. Watch this.
The president has no intention. The president has released plenty of information and I think has given more financial disclosure than anybody else.
But he would be a huge beneficiary for what we do know of this, correct?
Absolutely. He would obviously be a beneficiary of the estate tax. He would be a beneficiary of the AMT, the alternative minimum tax. And his empire is structured with these entities that would benefit from applying the corporate tax rate to your personal income. And there's clear hypocrisy and conflict of interest there, but this whole tax cut is geared toward benefiting the winners in American society at a time when he was elected by appealing to people who had lost over the last 30 years.
Wouldn't there normally be some oversight into into this? Why isn't there any now?
Well, I think there will be. I think there'll be a lot of resistance from Congress. I don't think this tax plan is going to pass because of the combination of the deficits that it will create and because the moment you start talking about details, then the losers are going to squawk.
So then why put it out there? Is this a victory for come Saturday for 100 days?
If he hadn't put it out, Don, right now we'd be talking about his first 100 days and how little he had done. This way, at least we're talking about a tax plan that, as he announces it, is going to create jobs. I think that it really was timed this way just to change the subject and to give him something to talk about.
Here's what the Democrats are saying. Here's Tom Perez, a DNC chair.
They call it a skinny budget. I think of another word that begins with S that I won't use. It's a shoddy budget. It's a shoddy budget. It's a budget that is morally bankrupt.
What do you make of that?
Well, if you compare this to, when the last big, that less huge tax reform, the '86 Reagan tax reform, so that involved binders that were presented to Congress. There was thorough preparation. And, it's this one page that is meaningless. It's not a tax plan. In my column today, I put quotes around every use of the word plan because it's not a plan. It's, I don't know what to call it.
This is, as I said, it's an outline.
If somebody turned it in, as for a term paper about how they think taxes should be structured in the U.S., they would fail. And I think the only reason to explain this timing is to try to influence and distract from the discussions about what's happening in the first 100 days.
Nicholas Kristof, thank you.
Hey, good to be with you, Don.
You as well. When we come back, nearly every senator busts to the White House briefing on a growing North Korea threat. We're going to have the very latest on what